everybody. My name is Matt Stranick, and this is the Writers on Writing interview series out of Northern Alberta. And I'm joined here, I'm really stoked, I have to tell you, with Mikkel Beckmen. And Mikkel is a significant...
Pronounced Mikkel, like pickle.
Mikkel, like pickle. These are the kinds of things that we have a pre-interview session, and we were so busy talking about other things. You betcha. We didn't even clear that. So, Mikkel.
It's an old Danish Norwegian name.
Mikkel Beckmen, significant musician, significant author, and a whole lot of other creative, professional, I dare say even, activism-oriented kind of roles and goings-on within the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the great state of Minnesota, in the United States of America. This is a show where I'm a Canadian guy, and I'm reaching out to various creatives across various scenes, not just in Canada, but including the United States and elsewhere. And we're really looking forward to putting them together in a unique indie media sort of format. And so again, much appreciation and respect, Mikkel, for joining us here on really short notice and through a very tenuous Facebook connection, I gotta say. Appreciate you very much, sir.
It's great to be chatting with you. I really appreciate you reaching out and being interested in some of the things happening here in Minneapolis and St. Paul around music, around literature, around activism, and in general, just it's nice to talk to and be with Canadians in these days to remind us of our commonalities and common interests, especially around art and culture, which ultimately will be the thing that saves us.
Couldn't agree with you more. And again, appreciate what you just said there. I am somebody who has had a long-standing interest in pop culture, literature, you name it. It's just been part of my life since I was a small child, and I feel that's the same with others. So again, chatting in, fraught, hyperbolic, kind of rhetorical times such as these, we have an opportunity to talk about things outside of that, which is itself, I think, a cool thing. So I do have some somewhat scripted-ish kind of questions. We did, folks, have a pretty significant pre-show chat, and we covered a lot there, uncovered a lot from what I can tell. So we'll just maybe jump into it here. In terms of folks who are just encountering you, Mikkel, and your work over decades at this point in the Twin Cities, you have on your personal social media, as well as some other, like journalism sites and, things that sort of crop up across the decades. You sort of identify through that space as a musician, percussionist, washboard, an author, and fairly into activism vis-a-vis sort of supporting homeless populations in the Twin Cities. First of all, have I got all that right? And then second of all, what else can we add to that, if anything, sir?
Well, I think that's, primarily how I have spent my time here. I grew up in Minneapolis. I think we moved here from Western North Dakota when I was in kindergarten, so kind of have been here my whole life. Minneapolis is the town I grew up in. I grew up right in uptown Minneapolis near Hennepin and Franklin Avenues, which are major intersections for people who know the city. And I have been what I describe as a foot soldier in the human rights struggle to end homelessness over the years, taking on a variety, ultimately, over time, of leadership roles as the director of the Office to End Homelessness for Hennepin County, as executive director of St. Stephen's Human Services, which was a mid-sized nonprofit organization here, and as a shelter worker primarily in the 90s, and as somebody who got into supporting the AIDS housing movement and trying to build housing for people living with HIV and AIDS and a variety of other aspects. But then also stumbling upon or discovering folk percussion through the washboard in the late 90s as well, and having then now sort of been able to perform 200 shows a year over the last at least decade or more, maybe it's probably longer than that, last 15, 20 years, and hosting a variety of, 3 shows a week, basically, where I invite the multitude of Americana, folk, singer-songwriter, blues, bluegrass, you name it, musicians to join me and play free shows at decent hours in local bars as a way to, Eduardo Galeano, the South American, the Uruguayan historian, said we understood culture to be the creation of any meeting space among people, and this idea that you can have live music just woven into your daily life, stopping on the way home to see incredible music for free, have a pint, and then go about your day, is something that I really believe in. It's all do-it-yourself, which comes out of the punk ethos, which I also am a fan of punk music, although these days I'm more of a Cat Stevens dude, I think, sort of quieter music and ambient and drone music, but certainly part of my past. And I think, that idea that, my Tuesday series I host at the 331 Club in Northeast Minneapolis. It's called the Workers' Playtime Series. It's both a riff on Billy Bragg's album, but also during World War II, the munitions factory workers, the BBC had a radio show called Workers' Playtime where people would stop work and just listen to music and enjoy it right there on the factory floor. That music can be a part of live music can be a part of our daily lives, and to make it accessible to ordinary people is kind of part of my personal mission. And that whole idea of community happening, and music is the language of emotion and personal history, and also collective history. And we do everything to music. We're born to it, we die to it, we celebrate, we mourn, we fight, we make love, we do everything to music because it is that language of life and of emotion. So to be a part of that has really been exciting. And then the writing piece, I have 2 books out. Both are creative nonfiction. I was doing some COVID relief work during the pandemic, helping to manage 2 hotels for people on the streets to prevent COVID from happening. And I have to say proudly, no homeless people died of COVID of the disease during the pandemic, because we pulled everybody out of congregate shelters and gave them their own rooms in hotels and 3 meals a day. And I was part of that work for about a year with a whole bunch of other wonderful people. At the end of it, I asked for a month off, leave of absence. I wanted to be alone after that. And I walked from the Canadian border down to Wisconsin along the North Shore of Lake Superior and took no music or books, which is a rare thing for me to be without either of those. Those are kind of coffee, books, and records are kind of my main three staples of sustenance as I go through this life. And just wrote it, and then out of that came a book, Gifts of the Superior Hiking Trail. And interestingly, the last chapter is about Charlie Parr's song 817 Oakland Avenue, which I proposed to be the national anthem, international anthem of backpackers everywhere and nomads and wanderers. It's a great song. And it was the first song I heard when I got home after being in the wilderness for a month. And then this new book that just came out in January is about spending 6 weeks in a van touring Europe with Charlie, playing music for people across 9 countries. So, I don't know, there's more to me, but,
you would appear to contain multitudes, sir. I'll put it that way. From my standpoint, my whole approach to this show, this series, has been that premise being that creativity is sort of a holistic endeavor, and so to the end that you have really sort of had such a significant amount of your professional identity, I suppose, for want of another term, with, it sounds like NGO sort of based kind of work.
Well, I mean, early on, I suppose Joe Strummer had as much to do with this as anything, and others, musicians, is I learned early on what I didn't want to do with my life. And so then, you look around and you decide what you don't want to do, and then what are the paths kind of forward for you, and sort of just, service is something just that I think has always been a part of me and in my family tradition as well. Come from a long line of mad artists and clergymen. And part of that, maybe, I don't know if that's a part of the Scandinavian social welfare tradition as well, but that just sort of, service to community was something that really resonated with me. And on all the aptitude tests in high school, I remember they said you should either be an artist, a professor, a minister, or like do social kind of stuff. And I being somewhat of a reserved kind of person and an inwardly drawn person, forcing myself out to be of service and work with people was something that was really good for me ultimately. And I learned so much. My first job was working in a homeless shelter for drinking men. It was a 50-bed shelter. You had to be drinking to get into the place, so I breathalyzed people, but not to screen them out, but to let them in, because we have in our community at any given time about 300 end-stage alcoholics who are on the streets. It's just sort of part of that population. And so having a safe place for people, especially in the winter, and having meals and health care for people was important. And I learned so much. Many of the men were combat veterans suffering from what in the old days we used to call soldier's heart, which is a term I prefer, but we call it PTSD now. In dealing with some of their experiences by using alcohol as a means to cope. I totally got that. But, learning from them and then just moving through life, being of service, not helping, because helping is changes the solidarity formula. When you help someone, you are up here and they're down here. But when you serve people, you are hopefully on a somewhat equal footing. And so that was always important to me, to be in what I call solidarity with people. And so, yeah, now I'm rambling, but I don't even remember what your was.
I greatly appreciate sort of the more fulsome explanation of the context because, again, to be clear, this is somebody who, with Mikkel, I've only encountered you through Facebook, and I sort of gave you the whole explanation of that.
Yeah.
But through some associations, basically, I think I can say publicly at this point with certain, musical groups and individuals and some literary groups and individuals increasingly. And I am sort of intending to cultivate that because I recognize that from a long period of time, like, the Midwest, the American Midwest is sort of the gateway to California. It's the gateway, you're on to Chicago, you're on to then on your way east. And so, the whole, the cultural significance of the Twin Cities. And again, right, you've spent your life there. You've spent your time on the street level with very, with people who have had a hard time finding the best way through life. And to me, that sort of speaks to a level of creativity and a commitment to community, which I think is really significant, right? I think anybody can look at that and appreciate what you've done. And then again, framing that within a larger tradition as you have, what you've been sort of, as you've been sort of speaking there, I keep thinking, so is this what Minnesota Nice is? The so-called Minnesota Nice? I'm trying to pin that down a little bit.
It's interesting that I suppose what sociologists would call that part of Minnesota. Minnesota is a very diverse place. First and foremost, this part of Minnesota is home to the Dakota people, and the coming together of two mighty rivers, the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River, is Bedote, which is a very sacred place and has some connection to the origin stories of the Dakota people. Bedote is where the two rivers come together. Tragically, after the Dakota War, it's also where Fort Snelling was and where the Dakota people were forcibly removed. Bedote is also the sound of a baby, first sound a baby makes after it's born. And it was a place, this is all told to me by Strong Buffalo, a Dakota elder, that Dakota women used to go to give birth right at the source of those two rivers. And to have them removed was an incredibly painful experience, to that birthing place for them and their people, and to be removed. But they're back, they're here, they're thriving in many ways. But a sociologist would call sort of that Minnesota nice thing a high context culture. It's very similar to Japanese culture and society, where it's very indirect forms of communication. So if people want to just Google high context culture or indirect high context culture, they can learn more about that style. It's very frustrating for outsiders because things are not obvious. And the unspoken is important. Unity is an important value in that, and so things are not said that maybe should be said in the name of unity or cohesion or not wanting to make anybody mad. And so that's a whole other conversation. But yes, I am part of that culture.
I'm trying to unpack it a bit, because I sort of thank you for the very eloquent sort of academic contextualization of that.
Yeah, we just Minnesota nice. Minnesota will give you directions to anywhere but their home is kind of the joke that people say here. Or did you hear about the Norwegian farmer who loved his wife so much he almost told her? So.
Well, again, this kind of aligns with, quite frankly, the whole. I don't know. There's a certain independence ethos that kind of goes along with your state's identity, and including ensconced within your professional sports franchises. Go Wild, I suppose. Go Wolves, I suppose. A bit of a historical achievement, right, in your city with the hockey, with the chase where Ovechkin officially beat Gretzky's record against it was in your city, right? So it was very significant goings on in your city culturally from a whole wide range of levels, right? Struggle to end homelessness, a major American city, right, with various cultural goings on. It's like people, like Prince and like some of the sort of higher sort of profile cultural exports, which are themselves significant. But again, culture is a spectrum, and it operates on a whole wide range of areas. I got social workers in my family, by the way, so that's kind of why I have a bit of an interest in that aspect of it. I do mean to speak more properly, more fulsomely to your literary and musical endeavors.
Yeah.
I guess wit, going back, I suppose. Again, we kind of have a similar thing. I'm from Atlantic Canada, very sort of oral-based culture, pretty fatalistic. We export people elsewhere for prosperity reasons mainly, their prosperity being contingent upon leaving the Maritimes. So we do sort of traffic in irony. We do sort of traffic in hyperbolic and at length kind of speech, right? Which is in its own way, I think, its own kind of a bit of a masquerade for cultural trauma, intergenerational trauma. And if we're talking perhaps a bit of what you alluded to there with the Minnesota Nice, I could almost maybe see a bit there to be referenced. That certainly is another conversation for another time. I saw your book. You put up your book on Facebook, as it were.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this looks like a fairly indie author on a fairly awesome topic. I do wonder if you might simply on that basis share a little bit about your current book, the one that you were speaking to on Facebook, and potentially your other one as well, and plus any other writing-oriented things that aren't in book form that you might want people to be aware of, my friend.
Yeah, well, I just put out this little notebook called A Way Back to Kindness, and it's the account of my tour across Europe with Charlie Parr. I was doing washboard accompaniment for Charlie. Charlie's been over to Europe 14, 15 times at least, I think, on tours over the last 20 years or so. He tries to get over there every couple of years, has a big following for his music there. I was able to go with him probably 12 years ago, I think, but I retired kind of from my day work last year, and so he invited me to come along on this journey. And it really is just more of sort of my reflections as I encountered each community we ended up in. And it's funny when you're on tour, you just get snippets of a place, because you roll in, you focused on the performance and setting up and playing, and then on to the next place. But within that, there is time to really sort of look around you and observe what's happening, and also to really sort of describe what's happening inside you, because as I say in the book, ultimately traveling is just a whole series of opening and closing flaps and zippers. But at its fundamental level, I mean, especially for me as a backpacker, that's kind of what you do all day long. But ultimately, it's the best way to learn about yourself and your place in the world as you encounter the world, as you move through it. And that's something that this sort of started to get me thinking about the a philosophy of nomadism, I guess, if is what I would call it, and sort of being a nomad culturally. Myself, I think, sort of alienated from much of the mainstream culture, along with probably a lot of other musicians here in this town, and what that foments in the way of music and scenes that happen here. But also then literally traveling and what that does. And so it's just a whole series. I wrote every day on the tour. And so this really is just it's a little book. Literally, it's a small, little book. But it's field notes every day from the 40 some odd days we were traveling, from getting picked up to getting back home to Minneapolis, and my reflections about it all. So, yeah. So Charlie and I both have books out. He's got 2 books out. I've got 2 out. He's got 2 more coming out soon. So we actually launched our own do-it-yourself publishing company called Borrowed Light Press.
Wow. So this is, folks, in the 3 or 4 days since I've initially made contact with Mikkel, this is something where I'm finding it out now that will be, shall we say, significant to the notes for this show. So we're talking about a multi-person creative enterprise specializing in books, primarily from YouTube.
It's for ourselves. We're not going to, at this point, put out works by others. It's primarily a vehicle for us. I think, in general, we found the publishing industry as exploitative as the music industry. For the most part, my first book came out on a great small press out of Winona, Minnesota called Ramshackle Press, which really was, kind of 2 anarchistic type dudes starting a company that wasn't going to be exploitative and putting out small works by musicians and local regional stuff around the driftless region of Minnesota and Wisconsin, which is a beautiful area that was untouched by the glaciers as they flattened everything in this part of the world. And so it's an ancient part of the world that's full of caves and trout streams and valleys and bluffs. And so, but now we're launching out on our own because we just figured, it's kind of like we're both do-it-yourselfers, and most of the books we sell happen at performances and shows, and so we don't need an infrastructure around it. But Borrowed Light, I was reading this account of somebody bumping into Franz Kafka on the streets of Prague, and they said to him, "Oh, you are looking particularly bright today, Mr. Kafka." And he said, "Oh, it's been a borrowed light." And borrowed light is also light that comes into a windowless room from another source. And so, as I kind of wrote, if all art starts by walking upon the ground of memory and sensation, which is Seamus Heaney, the great Irish poet, said, then like the light of stars reaching us years later, it is indirect and perhaps outside of ourselves, like the intelligence of birds. I've been reading a great book called The Intelligence of Birds. Because birds have tiny brains, but they're incredibly brilliant. And so maybe landscape actually is part of their brain, and it's outside of themselves, and yet how they interact with it, which I think is an incredible thought, especially as it relates to music. Is the brilliance of music somehow, does it reside at hand here, literally in the palm of our hand, outside of ourselves, and is it within grasp at all times by anybody? because I'm a self-taught. I mean, I was in band in school, but there's no school for washboard playing, right? It's a thing you attach to your body and you use it to respond to what you're hearing in the American folk sound, which sort of is, I think, best embodied by Mississippi John Hurt. And the way, I tried, when I first picked up a washboard in the late 90s, Charlie Parr bought me a washboard. He was coming to the shelter I was working at and making bag lunches. And we would take 200 bag lunches out in this little old bread truck and feed people living under bridges and outside. And we became friends. And there was a washboard hanging in the window of Steeple People all summer. I'd go to his place and we'd drink super cheap beer, and he'd play the guitar, and I'd bang on the beer crate. And he was like, well, that washboard's been marked down from $64 down to $8, and that's cheaper than a crate of bottled beer. So why don't we go down to the store and get that with the returnables from the beer, and you take it home and figure it out, and I'll get us a gig, and we'll play some music. And so then when I was trying to figure it out, I basically tried to imagine my whole body was Mississippi John Hurt's right hand. The American sound is very syncopated, kind of thumb bass line driven. And that's kind of how it started. And, then we got a weekly show at the Viking Bar on the West Bank. Spider John Kerner had Monday nights, I think, and Willie Murphy had Sundays, and the Front Porch Swinging Liquor Pigs had Fridays, and somebody else had Thursdays. Nobody had Tuesdays. It was like, so we walked into the bar and asked there was no owner. The owner had died, and the bartenders just kept the bar open and kept it going. So, but there was one guy in charge of music, and Mr. Bell, and we talked to him. He's like, I don't care if you want to come here on Tuesdays and play, go for it. Nobody else wants to play Tuesdays, so we started playing. So and that sort of is when you're open, I think, to life like that, and you say yes to things. You never know where it's going to go. It's that how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, or the journey of 1,000. You don't know where it's going to go, and you just sort of maybe it'll go nowhere, but you don't know until you just start doing something. I don't know. Right now,
I really appreciate a lot about what you just said. That's an awesome origin story, if I can put it that way. It's clear that this is more than just a sort of musical kinship. It's more than a sort of literary collaboration. It's more than a friendship. It's sort of a multi-dimensional engagement between sort of two individuals, and the creative dynamism which can emerge from those kinds of collaborations. You got to give credit to those individuals and entities when that occurs, right? So that's awesome, man.
Yeah, and it's been a great journey. From there, Charlie moved to Duluth, around the year 2001, I think. I stayed in town and formed a trio called the Crush Collision Trio with Lonesome Dan Case, who's one of the finest guitar players anywhere. Just an incredible performer. And we took our name from so back in the 1800s, way before TV and All-Star Wrestling and all that, for entertainment, they used to take old train engines and run them together, smash them together for spectacle and sport. And there was a very infamous train collision at Crush, Texas. So there was this guy named George Crush who worked for the Texas Railroad system, and he advertised free transit on any Texas railroad to get to this event. They were going to collide these two trains together, and 40,000 people showed up. It became the third biggest city overnight in Texas at the time. And they backed up these trains. They painted one of them red and one of them green, and I think people were betting on, it was probably a gambling kind of thing too. But actually, when the trains collided, one of the engines exploded and threw shrapnel into the crowd and injured a dozen, tons of people. I think I don't know if people died too, but it became this great Crush collision incident. But the most interesting, compelling piece of this story is that there was a 16-year-old kid in the audience, Scott Joplin, who basically founded American music. He started ragtime piano playing. A young African American kid from Texas, Scott Joplin. People know the Maple Leaf Rag and all these other great rag pieces that Scott Joplin wrote, and that became kind of the basis, I think. So the origins of American music come out of that, and so this idea that is American music really based on the collision of two train engines, and is that the American kind of anyway, that was the basis for our name. I thought it was a good name for a band.
I have to interject. I'm sorry, I can't allow that to pass. I mean, we'll go on. This is a professional endeavor, I gotta say, but you also have to be open to where the conversation takes you. And man, I just want to say thank you for putting that image in my mind, the train crush collision, because if that isn't, I don't know, man, part of my kind of just general, I don't know, overeducated Canadian dude kind of thinking on the current environment, the current cultural moment, is that history can not just repeat itself, but like slide backwards pretty quick, I mean, it's you kind of can go from points of high technological culture, and under certain circumstances, over a few generations, I mean, it's not like a set continuum going forward.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about like bringing the trains to smash forward. I'm like, geez, in a Cormac McCarthy kind of future, this could be happening in 100 years.
Yeah. Notes for part of your notes. You should put a link to the song, the Great Crush Collision March by Scott Joplin. That was the first piece he wrote, and there's speculation that he wrote it based on that incident. But and people can listen to that then and come to their own conclusions. But
that is absolutely lit. Okay, so yes, don't defund the PBS. I don't know who needs to hear this, but just in terms of venerable American institutions, right? In terms of like a Canadian kind of growing up next to the elephant, which you people have constituted, things that sort of work their way up, that we can sort of identify with. I mean, I have a picture of me from like 2014 with my kid, and I was living in the Middle East. I was in Qatar, and I at the T-shirt shop at Bellagio Mall, this posh mall in Qatar where the people go. And it's just like the Hot Topic or whatever it was, PBS, like the logo, and I'm like, yoink, like 35 American dollars in real, whatever, and like I wish I still had that shirt, to be honest, but that's another thing. So I'm just like, the educated value here, sir. I mean, the Ken Burns kind of, vantage point on what you just described.
Yeah.
I mean, history, culture, all of it found.
And it's been funny to me to be able to live in a town where I can play. I've been playing 200 shows a year on the washboard for the last 15 years or more. Because part of what flies under the radar here, because of sort of the more famously known scenes that brought forth Husker Du and the Replacements and Prince and Soul Asylum and all these great bands that we're all so proud of and love so much, is this huge folk scene here, this Americana folk thing. I mean, it's incredible. I can't find another city in the U.S. with as many places to play, as many things happening with it. It's incredibly vital. Minneapolis, St. Paul, we are a twin town of music, as I call it. The Mississippi River divides us, but there's just so many great things happening here with acoustic music. And the washboard ultimately is the great accompanying instrument for acoustic stuff. If you try to do drums and acoustic instruments, then you got to start plugging the guitars in, because you're overwhelmed. This is my own opinion. I'm sure others think differently, but you got to start plugging stuff in because the drums overwhelm. In many cases, drumming I don't think is as well suited to banjo or guitar or violin, obviously. And so the washboard becomes a real good way to build that percussive framework around an acoustic song, whatever style you're in. And there's just so many opportunities to play, but yeah.
Well, again, that's fantastic, and again, just sort of speak to representative scenes, right? Well, I guess when I saw, the fact that you are such a practitioner of the washboard, and in terms of how you just described and how it all sort of fits together within the wider folk music kind of paradigm, I do kind of think, Zydeco music. I do kind of think of like New Orleans kind of sound and things like that. Playing 200 gigs a year, that is huge. That is significant. Many congratulations on that. You
Yeah,
find yourself
I definitely don't do the Zydeco style. That's a very particular form of what we'd call a rub board, which I don't do that style. I do have a Piedmont kind of percussive style that I think is suited to a lot of other kinds of music. And I wouldn't say that's of a very particular place and time.
I wouldn't know a person with it,
Yeah. Yeah, but I love some of that stuff that's definitely of a place that's not this place, and of a style that's not of necessarily of this place. But I do have a friend who has a Cajun triangle that sometimes they'll bring to a gig that it's fun for me to play. That was built by the most famous Cajun music triangle maker known. So it's kind of fun.
Well, that is dope. And again, I appreciate all of these insights into a much wider, broader, richer conversation about, pan North American continent with music, right? Because again, we have our practitioners up here, and the sort of between and among, regional scenes and like. You just have to think about all the sort of interplay that's occurred over the years and decades between and among touring musicians, touring artists, and acts, sort of across the scenes relative to, the North American touring circuit writ large, right?
Yeah. And, ultimately what you need, you need places to play, and you need local people who can support venues and places ultimately. We're all postmodern. I'm not going to pretend I'm, living in a remote place playing a washboard out of some authentic sort of like, I'm not Appalachian. I'm not from Memphis. I'm not African American. I'm not Ukrainian. When Ukrainians are, there's a history of washboard playing there. I mean, it's definitely an international instrument, but we're all postmodern in the sense that we have the whole world accessible to us and all the music of the world. And so all of that influences us, and that's a good thing. We never want music to become a prison sonically, or like, oh, you're not playing the banjo the way the Monroe brothers did in 1927, so therefore I'm going to dismiss you. We need to take music to move us to a new place, to a different place, because the current reality is a wreck anyway. And so I love, and I'm part of a group called Corpse Reviver, and we are the world's, I think, maybe only tribute band to the Harry Smith Anthology of American Folk Music, which came out in 1952 and features songs that first were, put out in the 20s when technology allowed for the mass reproduction of music through 78 records, on shellac. And the first record players were all actually made by furniture companies. And so then they started record labels actually as a way for people to buy their furniture, their record players. And a whole bunch of great music was recorded. But we do it in a new way, and because we don't want to be imprisoned by a tradition, by a folk tradition, and nobody's going to tell us how to play a song. And we want to make it new and fresh and move things forward. I think, again, to quote Eduardo Galeano, he said, the people in power want us to forget. The whole history of the Americas, North and South, is the struggle of the people to remember versus people in power wanting us to forget our power, to forget our traditions, to forget our, music, everything that gives us strength. And he said, memory is not an anchor to drag us down. It's a catapult to launch us into a different place. And so it's vital, whether it's punk or what classical or whatever, and maybe I'm more of a Pablo Casal's kind of romanticist with music, where he said, the notes are just guidelines. They're not to imprison. They're there for guidance, But but we can move around that. So yeah, we just have to keep all that music, and that's why it's some of my favorite bands. I just saw that the bass player for the Gang of Four just passed away, and talk about their first album, Entertainment, I described it as an escape hatch out of the space capsule of punk music that was set in a orbit that was declining and locked in, and they found the escape hatch over there in Leeds, England, in the UK, and just then a million other great bands followed in their footsteps through that escape hatch into a whole new universe. And that's the excitement of music, is that somebody's going to come along and just like find that escape into the next place, which is what I think Husker Du did so well here, with taking what had a label and was sort of becoming kind of formulaic, and suddenly just look, we can go into this whole new landscape, and yeah, I mean that's just sort of how it is, and that's how it is here for some reason. I don't know if I don't know why. If it's because we're truly an international city that welcomes people from all over the world, which we are, and I hope we remain, or because and we get this cross-pollination thing happening, or because the winters are long, or I don't know, but it's all very exciting.
Well, I really am appreciative of your time here, and I really hasten to really think of anything that we haven't covered that I would have hoped to achieve. In a lot of ways, certainly this communication with you has, I wouldn't say exceeded my expectations, because quite frankly, I didn't have any. It's more about, let's just sort of see where the conversation goes.
Yeah.
I definitely have some things to follow up for myself, for my own, learning and general, benefit as a human, I suppose, just based on some of the incident personages and, cultural entities which you have so eloquently spoken to here, sir. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of fit in as sort of a closure here before we shut her down, my friend?
I don't think so. I mean, if people are interested in my books, it's a total do-it-yourself project. They should reach out to me through Facebook, through Mikkel B, Mikkelbee, and we can do a Venmo thing, and I'll put a book in the mail and send it to you. I just sent a couple over to the UK, and I mail them out all the time. But there's no website to go and buy the books. And I'm boycotting Amazon, so you can't get it there. And so, yeah, it's a total do-it-yourself thing. But, I'm on my fourth printing of the first book, and it seems to be popular, and people seem to enjoy that. But I think, as far as the writing goes, I'm working on a couple of other things. I'm actually working on a series of 45 records with essays and art that I want to release on a variety of topics. Working on a piece of fiction, which features a combat scene between an evil spirit and a monk musician in a bar in Minneapolis, where they use the severed arm of the Def Leppard drummer's severed arm as a weapon, among other things. So it'll be fun. I hope, if I can get it done.
Wow!
I
did not expect Def Leppard to enter this conversation. I am legit surprised that we have reached this point.
Well, yeah, that's the great thing about just having casual conversation. You never know where it's going to go.
Well, I'll be fully transparent.
Down in coffee shops talking to people. I think everybody should carve out time in their week to just go and shoot the shit, as we say here.
Yeah, well, and this is, again, behind me. I don't know if people are paying much attention to the background. This is actually just grabbed off Google Maps Street View of the Dubliner, which is where Mikkel will be playing tonight, I believe. I saw on the Facebook calendar.
Every Thursday, for almost the last 12 years, I've hosted a happy hour at the Dubliner from 5 to 7. Again, a way to stop by on your way home from work or whatever you're doing to hear great music. And Jeff Ray, who's an incredible resonator guitar player and is sort of a avant-garde player who sounds like Debashish Bhattacharya and the Allman Brothers and got in Memphis and brings his own take to the instrument is playing. He's just incredible. People should follow Jeff Ray all around the world. He and I are starting a project called Ice Horse, which if you take the sounds of like bands from Mali and the Tuareg desert regions of the world, like Tanarowen or Bombino or Terakeft, but you imagine Minnesota winter as desert. So instead of sand, we have snow and ice. Instead of camels, we have dog sleds. Instead of jeeps, we have snowmobiles. And what is the sound sonically of that sort of desert? So it's very much in that trans-hypno blues realm, but we're trying to make it Minnesotan. It's sort of like, what is the sound of a walleye calling to you from the ice fishing hole or something? I don't know. Pretty cool stuff. So, yeah, there's worse ways to pass the time, I guess, on the journey from birth to death than music and books, right? And coffee.
These are things that are important.
And activism. I'm sunburned because I was standing out at the Capitol for 3 hours chanting with 40,000 other people this past weekend.
I'm among the Facebook Minnesotans, you know, and I'll save anybody who's listening to this the run up to the social media experiment, which has kind of led to the present conversation. Intentionally on my part, I gotta say, I do see a lot of Minnesotans with signs this past weekend, and kudos to you for standing up for your democracy.
Yeah.
You're not putting up with it, man. That's fucking tight.
Well, what I've said to people is, it's all fine and good to attend a march or a protest or show up, but what we need is an infrastructure. And so we need organizations and we need lasting, organized groups. And so I'm part of a group that started called Minnesota Music Resistance, and we're kind of a loose affiliation of musicians. We're going to be putting on a concert in June to benefit the American Civil Liberties Union, which fights for people's human rights. But we're hoping to sustain this organization. And I think everybody, every crochet network, every bowling league, every, poker club should start a resistance organization. And it's kind of how, I think when you look at the model from South Africa and the UDF, they basically had a dense organization where everybody was organized into some kind of a group, every church lady group, every businessmen's association, everybody, and they all formed their own groups, and it was dense enough where it actually had a major impact. So, we're starting with what we know, which is music.
Folks, I cannot think of a better way for this to go out. There will be links to these various things in the notes below. I am putting this into stunt production, so this will be out between about 12 and 1 p.m. Minnesota time, which, as far as I'm concerned, qualifies as breakfast television in Minnesota, vis-a-vis your friendly Canadian pal here in Northern Alberta. So there we go. Appreciate you all for checking out the Writers on Writing series. Hopefully you will be interested to engage with other conversations on the website, and as well be sure to check out all of Mikkel's associated and affiliated creative projects, musical, literary, and otherwise. And if you're in the Twin Cities, be sure, of course, to visit the Dubliner and as well as other neighborhood venues, because really neighborhood venues are what build and sustain culture in the first place, and I won't hear otherwise. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody, or watching, or however you're encountering this. Appreciate you being here, and bye for now.